Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and I'm John Johnson. And today I'm going to talk about creating a safe space for discussing your problems and how we go about doing that, why you want to be able to do that, the benefit of doing that, and what happens when you don't create that safe space. And we'll be right back after this.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back. Again, this is John Johnson, and this is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. And I'm your host. One of the things that I wanted to talk about today was creating a safe space for open and honest discussion of problems. Obviously, any two people who get together are going to have conflict, and creating a safe space for resolving your conflict is a very important part of the relationship. It's just as important as traveling to places or spending time going to movies or eating dinner together, because as my belief is, any two people that get together, they're obviously getting together because they enjoy their time together. They enjoy each other's company. But deciding that you like someone solely based on those qualities, you're missing a real important piece of the long-term possibility of the relationship, and it's how do you handle conflict. And handling conflict is as important as breathing when it comes to two human beings either existing together in the same space or just having a relationship. Well, again, this is whether it's your boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wife, child parent, and in that regard, it really helps kids to understand how to conduct themselves as well. So you'll be setting an example for your kids. But going back to the creating a safe space, we got to start with a few concepts here. Number one, it's being honest is encouraged. That, as reasonable as that sounds to you listening to it, you can't imagine how many people, when they're having a conversation of this type, because it feels very scary, that they're going to couch some of their feelings. They're not going to really be open and honest. And honesty is about being able to share your feelings. It's not necessarily about the criticism or taking the opportunity to criticize somebody else because they are now your listening audience, but it's about sharing your feelings. Now, it takes some time for you as an individual to get to the bottom of what it is you're feeling, because you can be very, very activated just by what's going on. And describing that in words that can be heard by someone else that's something that you have to learn to develop, and you have to be in your own space to do that, because it's easy to get hyped up, to get caught into somebody else's energy and their interference, their static. But being able to represent yourself could be a milestone for you. And I know a lot of people have trouble with representing themselves. That's sometimes it has everything to do with not being allowed to speak when you were young. You're told to shut up, that you don't have an opinion, that nothing you say matters. And if you grow up with that perception, or have not been a very strong personality, maybe you've always been quiet, didn't really have a forum for representing yourself, or maybe you've been bullied, you're very afraid. And we have to, this is an opportunity to begin to work on those kinds of things. You can read books, you can get counseling, and certainly I think as you start to look at how you yourself operate, you can then begin to understand how you're perceived. Because if you don't represent yourself very well, people don't figure that you have an opinion, and they may speak for you or speak over the top of you. So it is an opportunity to visit some of those things. But again, going back to creating the space in the relationship, this is about bonding, and this is a very good exercise. We should set time limits for this, because when we get into these conversations, especially when we're talking about things that we don't like, it's not the opportunity to be endless in the complaint department. And that is a real important thing to grasp with this. Discussing these things takes time and patience, but we don't have to spend all night doing this, or all morning, or all afternoon. And both partners get to share in this. Or if it's a family setting, then each person gets an opportunity to say their piece. And being able to say it in this group or in this forum is very intimate. It's very personal. And it should be with the understanding that what we say in this space stays in the space. If it's something that involves other people, then we can decide how we're going to handle that aspect. But I had initially started this conversation with the idea about people having a space to resolve their conflict. And I'm giving you some tools with which to do that. Going forward, by doing this, by creating this space, you show a level of maturity, and you show trustworthiness. You show that you're willing to deal with problems and not sweep things under the rug. That is a very important thing to have for yourself. It's also an important expectation. And realize that when you are with people who are willing to problem solve, and not everybody knows how to do that, but when you're with people who are willing to problem solve, these are individuals that you want on your team. These are people that you want in your space and your experience. Because clearly sweeping things under the rug does not solve problems. It's a tactic, and it's something that some people do because they don't know how to solve problems, irregardless of how loud they may seem. They could be very boisterous. They could seem like they're leaders. But in really getting to the bottom of things, there's technique, and it takes skill, and it takes patience, and it takes the desire to do that. And when you're a part of that, and in the end, what we want to have is that we want to have closeness, and that we're going to resolve things. It helps things move forward. Now, in this space, it's my view that anything is open. I think we should have an understanding about the topics that we're going to discuss, but whether it's sex, whether it's children, whether it's money, let's make it something that we really have a vested interest in, so that we can begin to move forward. Some of the things to realize is that as a listener, that you have a filter, and you want to be able to take that filter and think of a filter as being a set of glasses that has a tint to it. And if you're looking at things through that filter, through that tint, then it's going to obviously change what you're seeing, or in this case, what you're hearing. And you have to remove that filter and give your partner the opportunity to represent themselves. It's not about you putting words into their mouth, and it's about being an open listener to what they have to say. The part to that becomes difficult is, as a listener, you may feel that you're being criticized, and you may very well be criticized for things that you've done. The thing that I encourage is, again, to be open to what you're hearing. Write down the things that you are hearing, the things that are being said, and that way you can circle back around when the opportunity comes for you to speak, so that you can get clarification. And when we move forward from that, then we can be part of the problem solving. But this is something that both partners get to do. So I'm just going to speak it from one person. When the discussion happens, know that you're going to have feelings that are going to come up. This isn't the time for you to argue with the person that's talking. This is a time for you to be in the listening mode. And again, this is about creating the safe space that the speaker knows that you're not going to interrupt, that you're not going to try to talk over the top of them. Because if you do that, then you ruin the process. And this is very delicate. When you're new at this, then what you wind up doing is you wind up going into old habits. It's just you have to practice. And sometimes this is the kind of thing that you can learn in a counseling session because you have a counselor as a referee, and they can listen for when this thing starts to get derailed. It can be very challenging for two people to operate in this space on their own because of the history that you two may have. And if there's big problems that need to be discussed, we may already have our biases, but we're attempting to do this. And when you're trying to do this, remember to also support each other, give praises, and nod with approval. I think nod with recognition was probably more to say when things are being said, and then review it. After a few minutes, review what you heard so that the problems can begin to be solved. And in terms of, let's say you're having a money issue. Money, children, and sex are three of the important issues in relationships that are very, very, very challenging. So know that those are very deep topics, and they come front-loaded with all kinds of things because of who we are. We all have needs, and these things make us very vulnerable. You're vulnerable to your partner, your sexual partner, and vice versa. And you've operated in these roles sometimes just blindly, and if you haven't discussed these things, talking about them down the road may seem like, okay, well, we're trying to change the rules here. And maybe it's really that rules were never established. It's just something that got going, and you find out later on that you didn't like it. So be open to the fact that things are going to be a little bit different. And I think you can make this work, but try the process and do it for a little while. Take a break. Remember to praise each other for having the courage to do it, and remember that you two are a team, you're partners. One of the things I had mentioned is that what happens when you don't create this safe space? Well, what happens is your relationship suffers. It suffers innumerably because it's not only what happens to your partner, but when you feel like you can't bring up a problem or and you feel stifled or you feel muffled or muted in representing yourself, then and I'm just picking an option here. Some people feel that when they can't talk to their partner, they're going to talk to their friends. And sometimes friends are good listeners, and that's that. Some of us have friends that are not good listeners, but they try to give us advice, and they try to give us advice on problems that they don't even know how to solve themselves. That is not a good choice, because that advice, if you take it, may harm your relationship. And there are a lot of people out there giving advice, and I'm one of those, but I try to do it in a neutral fashion. But there are a lot of people out there giving advice that's very polarizing. That is not healthy for you and your partner. And in the case of some people, it may make them ripe for affairs. And for that harms a relationship, because I don't think your partner would really be happy about the idea that you're sharing the information with someone else who doesn't have a vested interest in being neutral. But the thing that happens when we go to our friends is they generally want to support us. It's a valuable friend who is able to be objective, who is able to operate in the space of knowing that there's two sides to every story. And if anything, if a friend were to give you advice, they would be offering probably some of the most sage advice if they were to say, talk to a counselor, only because the counselor can be neutral. They're trained at being neutral. And as I shared this in one podcast about selecting a therapist, is you can find someone that you work with, that you click with, and that'd be great for information. That's wonderful. If you find one and you're not working well with that person, you don't seem to have the communication, it's just not happening, feel free to change. Now, that's not to say change because they're telling you to deal with your issues, because sometimes people leave a therapist because they feel like their buttons are getting pushed and, this person really upsets me. No, sometimes they're telling you information, things about yourself that you need to work on. That's different. But sometimes there are certain therapists that just don't work with your personality, and for that reason, you can change. But when it comes back to dealing with your friends, your friendship, friends aren't always the best advice givers. I think they mean well, because they don't want to see you hurt. They may be vested in the fact that you've done them favors, and they want to be a support person. So it might be very hard for them to be able to say something to you that's really objective, because they want to stay your friend. Yeah. So to wrap this up, it benefits the both of you because you tend to learn what you both need in the relationship, and you're able to have a voice with each other. That's what's important, having a voice with each other. And you're setting the bar a little higher. It's important to not only have a voice with each other, but to know who has your back. That's what relationships do. That's the power of that. That's building, that team building and supporting each other. And it obviously gives you an opportunity to learn something about yourself as well as your partner. Learn what's valuable, what's important, what they're vulnerable about. Something that I also hope comes of this too is that you learn not to deflect responsibility. That happens in relationships. Sometimes when we get into talking about things that are important is that we begin to deflect because things start to happen and start stepping on our toes. This can definitely happen when you're creating these safe spaces, but it's to learn not to criticize your partner when these things start to come up. You just want to point them out, and hopefully the listener is a little open to hearing what's happening. But deflecting, and let me give you an example of deflecting. Deflecting would be, for example, if you said to me, all right, John, I'm tired of you leaving your socks all over the place. Would you please put your socks in the hamper? And my deflecting would be to say, well, you know what? You do it too. Every time I see such and such and such, this is what you do. So it takes the focus off of what I'm doing and then puts the focus back on you because I'm trying to not be in conversation about what your complaint is. That's deflecting. It happens all the time. And what it is, it's disempowering to your partner. Because when the opportunity comes, because they may think of it at a particular time. They may think of it when they see it. But when you become defensive, which is oftentimes what deflecting is relating to, when you become defensive about something, then you want to redirect the conversation. Well, that's deflecting. So now that you see it, I'm sure that we all have examples of it. And that's the thing that I don't want you to do. When you have a complaint, when you have a concern, then you bring it up, you talk about it, and then you move on. It's not about piggybacking on somebody else's list of gripes, because obviously in relationships, one person may have a bigger list than the others because one of the other partners is a little more sensitive to things. So be mindful of tamping down on some of that. Again, every day is not a day to have a complaint session. That's not what this is about. We should learn to set aside time for that. And when we do, we set aside the idea that we're also going to solve it, and we're not going to come away enemies when we're done with this, because we're really trying to build closeness. If we're building walls between us when we're doing this, we're either doing it wrong or we're with the wrong person, because that's not the idea. The idea is to build closeness. And with closeness, we have togetherness. And I'll be right back after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we're back. I'm your host, John Johnson, and this is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm going to talk about in this segment, fixing your mistake. Here's a mistake. You get into a discussion with your partner, and things kind of get elevated, and you start yelling. If you yell at your partner, the first thing that's going to happen is most people generally shut down, meaning the listening stops. And for that, a lot of words are probably getting exchanged. And when I say listening, I don't mean the fact that they hear you. They can obviously hear your voice. But listening has to do with interpretation, interpreting what you're saying, what you're meaning. And When the listening stops, meaning the fact that they're trying to understand what you're saying to them, be it your feelings about your opinions, be it your feelings about yourself, those kinds of things, when that all begins to turn to a negative, then the listening has stopped. And yelling at your partner is the fastest way to get that to happen. Now, when you want to fix that mistake, first of all, you have to recognize that you've made the mistake and own up to it, because that's going to help de-escalate the situation. Going forward from there, it's going to take time, because every person has their own space and where they need to be with that, the apology. That's when I say own up to it. You have to apologize for that. And then everyone is going to have to take their time to be able to process that feeling. Because when a person feels injured, a person feels hurt, when their feelings feel stomped on, it takes a while for them to overcome that intensity, for this thing to back down. So fixing your mistake means you have to apologize. You're going to have to give your partner time to acknowledge it. For some people, it can happen very quickly. Others, it takes a while, because they've got a lot of things that are going through them at that point. And when they're ready to engage in that conversation, engaging you fixing the mistake, then you can do that. But you have to do it at their invitation as well. So it's a mutual thing. And we're going to have to work on the fact that how you message things. It has to do with saying things in a way that you can be heard. And a way that can be heard means it's without the yelling, because that's very intense. That's very scary for some people. And you start tapping into things about their past and their background that they may not be very comfortable with. Some people are comfortable with loud noises, or people shouting, or being very demonstrative with their hands, because they grew up with that. And that's just part of how they communicate. But some people aren't. And when you're a person that's used to talking with your hands and being very animated, and you're with a partner who isn't, that's very scary. And you have to recognize that and respond accordingly. And maybe it does come down to you explaining yourself and your behaviors a little better in gauging the reaction. But here we're talking about fixing the mistake and getting your partner to hear you, because you have invested in it, and they're valuable to you. That's why you're doing this. This isn't just an exercise in just practicing things. This is about trying to get to the place where you two have an understanding. So by acknowledging your mistake, by apologizing for it, and then approaching this in a much gentler fashion, I think you can achieve the result of being heard. And for that, you then show value to your partner, show them that they are valuable to you. And it's really a really good precedent to set, because then you can expect to have the same thing in return. Now, this kind of slides into another topic that I'm going to get into. When there's been a breakup, I'm talking about two people have been together and they decide to break up the relationship. Now, it may not be over. I can give you some hope with that. It may not be ended just because people were upset and heated. Now, in this podcast, I've been talking about owning up to your mistakes, acknowledging what you've done, and creating a safe space for solving problems. Breakups are oftentimes a catalyst to really begin to look at these things, because quite often things have built up over time, and the relationship just finally fractures to where it's catastrophic. Some people, there's no going back, because maybe it's been in that space of destruction for too long. I still feel that in a lot of these kinds of relationships, they can be fixed. But you have to be willing to do some real work and changing your whole approach to how you communicate with your partner, how you listen to your partner. And for example, being honest, and we all know what that means. I don't have to define that. Being honest about who you are, what you've done, and what you look forward to in the future. That requires time. Breakups often create this sense of panic that, oh my gosh, it's over and done with forever and we can't get it back. Well, again, the whole topic of this conversation right now here for me is to say that you can fix those things, but you just don't keep trying to fill a void with that same person. Wanting that person in your life, it has to have meaning. It has to have purpose. So solving these problems with them, with their input, has to do with you really taking time to think about what's going on, what caused the breakup, and discussing those things with your partner so that we can finalize the solution. Because it's not about just getting together long enough to talk about the problem over and over and over again, because that's not a solution. That's a tactic some people use that's endless, and that can happen. And it happens in marriages all the time. People just talk, and they don't really resolve anything. Then you look up down the road, you've spent 7, 8, 10, 15, 20, 25 years with somebody, and nothing's changed. I don't think we want that particular outcome. There are some people that are very good at talking about things, but they're not good at solving things. And I'm not here to suggest that all of those individuals really want that. They may even think that they are solving the problem. Sometimes you need professional help in dealing with things, and it's really being open to looking at that. So if you've gone through a breakup and some of this stuff sounds familiar, well, you've got a problem that you probably can't fix yourself, and you're going to need some input. And I'm not suggesting that you can do it all on your own. You might need to do some reading, some research, talk to a counselor, because here's something that happens to many of us when we problem solve. If we've never gotten out of our own head about dealing with things, how are we going to introduce a new idea, a new concept? It's probably not going to come from you. It's going to come from outside. It's going to come from a new influence, a coach. And that's my metaphor for a counselor. But it's going to come from a different direction. Because if you are so much a part of the problem, how can you fix it? You need new input. And that's where these different ideas come from. Now, sometimes as I'd shared in one of my earlier topics about talking to friends and things, again, be careful with that, because it's one thing to talk to somebody who's objective, but it's another thing to talk to someone who's biased, who may not give you very good information. So I'm suggesting that when there's been a breakup, that you can fix it, but it's about being honest with yourself, being able to answer questions from your partner about things that they're concerned about, and giving this thing time to repair itself. If there is another person involved, and by that example I'm talking about if this is an affair kind of thing, that's going to be hard to fix with that other person involved, because that's an entity that affects each relationship, each person. You have the person that is been in the first relationship, Jim and Sandy. If Jim and Sandy have been together for a long time and Jim or Sandy has an affair with someone else, well, that person that's being had the affair with is a part of this equation, and that's not going to work. You're going to have to disconnect from that in order to make the primary relationship have its opportunity to reconnect and to move forward. Something else to be mindful of is you don't get anywhere trying to repair a relationship when you're just doing the blame game. It's really look in the mirror time and what problem did you create? And somebody has to make the first move. I say, if you're my listener, you make the first move. Decide if you want that relationship, you're going to have to put effort into making it work. It's not all about one person does all the work and the other person sits back. It's a collaborative effort. But when you want to do something of this nature, you're going to have to come with answers. You can't fake your way through that. Everyone has their intuition about when somebody's BS meter starts to go off. And if you feel like somebody's not being honest with you, not being sincere, and that's what I say when I mean honest, I'm talking about sincerity, then it's a turnoff. And you don't have to be a scientist to know that somebody is wrong. If you happen to have the feeling that somebody is not being forthcoming or is not really giving their all to it, then that's all you have to go on. You don't have to have irrefutable proof. You don't have to have forensic science or anything like that. Some people are into that. Some people feel like, okay, well, if you don't have absolute proof, how can you say X, Y, or Z? I says, you know what? If this isn't about that, this is about feelings. That's what relationships are. They're about feelings. And it's about being able to work on communication and sharing those feelings in a healthy way, and growing from that. You've been listening